The call came at 2:47 inches the morning, Calgary time. I remember the exact minute because I had just finished a double shift at the field hospital in Juba, South Sudan, and I was finally lying down for the first time in 19 hours. My phone buzzed on the cot beside me. I picked it up, expecting my supervisor. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize, a local Toronto area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost did. "Is this Claire Renaud?" a woman's voice asked. Formal, clipped, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who delivers bad news for a living. "Speaking," I said, sitting up in the dark. "My name is Patricia Osei. I'm a real estate paralegal with Donovan and Park in Toronto. I'm calling because a property registered under your name at 14 Harwick Crescent, Mississauga, was listed for sale this morning. The listing agent has submitted an offer for conditional acceptance. I was conducting a routine title search on behalf of the buyer and I noticed some irregularities. I wanted to reach you before anything moved further." I sat there in the heat of a South Sudanese night, holding my phone in both hands, reading that sentence back to myself 3 times before I understood every single word. My house in Mississauga that I had bought 6 years ago with my own money, my own credit, my own decade of sacrificing vacations and new cars, and every small luxury my colleagues spent their paychecks on was listed for sale. While I was on a 12-month humanitarian posting that I had told exactly 3 people about, my mother, my younger brother Ethan, and my stepfather Dale. I did not cry. I did not scream into the South Sudanese night. I pulled up my notes app, opened a blank page, and I said, "Tell me everything." My name is Claire, and I am 31 years old. I'm a registered nurse, and for the past 4 years, I've been taking international postings with a global health organization, 6 months here, 8 months there, places that need trauma care more than they need another coffee shop. I am not a person who panics. I've held pressure on wounds that would make most people faint. I've translated grief into action so many times that calm has become something close to a survival instinct. So when Patricia Osei told me that the listing documents had been signed with a power of attorney, I didn't fall apart. I started thinking. The power of attorney she was referring to, I knew exactly what it was. I had drafted it 2 years earlier, before my posting in Ethiopia, when my mother had asked me what would happen if I got sick overseas. "What if you need someone to manage things back home?" she had said, looking at me with the worried expression she'd perfected over 30 years of mothering. "What if there's an emergency?" I had gone to a notary, paid the fee, and signed a document giving my mother and only my mother the authority to manage my personal banking and correspond with my property manager on maintenance matters. It was supposed to cover things like renewing my tenant insurance, not redirecting my life savings. I found out in that phone call that my mother had not acted alone. Dale had been the one to contact the listing agent. Dale, who had moved into our family home when I was 14 years old, and who had spent the 17 years since treating my modest professional success as a personal inconvenience. Dale, who referred to my nursing career as playing doctor in poor countries. Dale, who had borrowed money from my mother 3 times in the past 5 years, money I later found out she had quietly pulled from a joint account she'd opened with me when I was in university and never closed. Ethan, my younger brother, was the reason for all of it. Ethan, who was 34, and had never held a job for longer than 8 months. Ethan, who had spent the last year accumulating gambling debts, not the quiet, shameful kind, but the loud, dangerous kind that involved men calling the house at all hours. The number Patricia mentioned was $97,000. That was what Ethan owed. That was what my house was being sold to cover. I asked Patricia how far the process had gone. She told me the listing had been active for 6 days. The offer on the table was $689,000. Conditional on financing and inspection. The buyer had waived the inspection to speed things up. Financing was pre-approved. If no one intervened, the deal would firm up within 48 hours. I had 48 hours. I was 8,000 kilometers away. It was nearly 3 in the morning. "Do not confirm anything to the listing agent," I told her. "Please. I know this puts you in a difficult position, but I need 12 hours. There was a pause. Patricia Osei was doing the quiet calculation of a professional who cares about doing things correctly. "I have a legal obligation to inform the buyer's agent of a potential title dispute," she said carefully. "I can hold off on that for a few hours while I complete my documentation. That is all I can promise you." I thanked her and hung up. Then I opened my laptop, my hands completely steady, and I started making calls. The first thing I did was contact my own lawyer, a woman named Reshma Khatri, who I had hired 2 years earlier to help me set up a proper estate plan before my Ethiopia posting. Reshma had done more than just update my will. She had walked me through the limits of power of attorney, the risks of leaving property exposed during long absences, and the one tool she recommended above everything else for someone in my situation. I had followed her advice completely. What Dale and my mother did not know, what Ethan, with his sweating hands and his borrowed time, did not know, was that 14 Harwick Crescent had not been registered in my personal name for the past 18 months. Reshma and I had transferred the title to the Claire Renaud Family Trust. I was the sole trustee. The property was a trust asset. A power of attorney granted to act on behalf of Claire Renaud, the individual had exactly zero authority over a trust that Claire Renaud controlled but did not personally own in her own name. My mother had signed documents she didn't understand. Dale had coached her through a process he had researched just enough to feel confident and not nearly enough to be right. The listing was fraudulent. The signature on the sale authorization was not legally valid. And the buyer, a couple from Brampton who had waived their inspection and accelerated their financing to close fast, had no idea they were 48 hours away from purchasing a title that could not legally be transferred. I called Reshma at 3 a.m. She answered on the second ring because she had seen my number and she knew I was overseas. I explained everything in under 4 minutes. She told me to send her everything Patricia had shared. She said she would have a cease and desist drafted by 7 a.m. and filed with the land registry office when it opened. She said 3 words before she hung up that I held on to for the next 36 hours. They made mistakes. I did not sleep. I watched the clock move from 3 to 5 to 7, lying on my cot in the compound, listening to the compound generator hum. I thought about the house. I had saved for it for 4 years. 4 years of rental apartments and packed lunches and saying no to trips my friends were taking. I put down $138,000 and took a mortgage for the rest. And I remember walking through the empty rooms the day I got the keys, touching the walls like I needed to confirm it was real. I had refinished the kitchen cabinets myself over a long weekend. I had planted 2 lilac bushes in the front yard because I loved the smell of them in May. I thought about my mother standing in that kitchen while I was thousands of kilometers away, and I made a decision. I was not going to be angry yet. Anger is a fire that burns the person holding it before it reaches anyone else. I was going to be precise. I was going to be quiet. And I was going to let every single consequence fall exactly where it belonged. Reshma filed the cease and desist at 9:03 a.m. Eastern Time. By 10:30, the listing agent, a man named Trevor something, had been formally notified that the property was subject to a title dispute and that the vendor's signing authority was legally invalid. By noon, the buyer's lawyer had received the same notification and had advised their clients to pause. The deal did not firm up. The conditional period expired without confirmation. The sale collapsed. I found all of this out through Reshma in a series of texts I received between my afternoon rounds. I was changing a dressing on a 12-year-old boy's leg when my phone buzzed with the words, "Listing agent has withdrawn. Title is clean. They know." I finished the dressing. I said something reassuring to the boy's mother. I walked to the supply room and stood there alone for 60 seconds with my eyes closed. Then I booked the earliest available flight home. It was leaving in 4 days. That was fine. I didn't need to be there for what happened next. I just needed to be there for the conversation I was going to have when I arrived. Dale called me the morning after the deal collapsed. I was still in Juba. I let it ring. He called again. I let it ring again. He sent a text that said, "Claire, we need to talk before you do something you'll regret." I screenshotted it and sent it to Reshma. She replied with a thumbs up. My mother called the afternoon before I flew out. This time I answered. I had rehearsed nothing. I just held the phone and waited. "Claire," she said. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she knows she's done something wrong, thin and careful, like she's testing each word for weight before she puts it down. "I want to explain. I know what happened," I said. "All of it. I've spoken to my lawyer. The listing has been canceled. I'm flying home Thursday." A long silence. Dale thought. "I know what Dale thought," I said. "I'll see you Thursday." I hung up. My hands were still steady. I landed at Pearson on a Thursday afternoon in early November. Gray sky. The smell of cold air that I hadn't breathed in over a year. I took a cab directly to the house. I had been told they would be there. My mother had called twice more, and each time I had said only, "I'll see you Thursday," and ended the call. I think some part of her believed I was coming to negotiate. I think Dale believed he could still manage the situation. I think Ethan, who I knew would be there, because he always materialized when things were unraveling, believed the worst outcome was a family argument that would eventually blow over. The cab turned onto Harwick Crescent. The lilac bushes were bare and small in the November gray. The house looked exactly as it always had. There was Dale's truck in the driveway, and my mother's Civic behind it. Someone had removed the lockbox the listing agent had installed. A small thing, but it meant they knew the game had changed. They were in the house waiting for me. I paid the driver, picked up my bag, and walked up the front path. My tenant, a quiet software developer named Marcus, who I'd rented to for 2 years, had been asked by Dale to leave for the week. Marcus had texted me while I was still overseas to let me know, and I had told him I was sorry and that I would make it right. He was the first person I had called when I landed. I told him the situation was resolved and he could return Friday. He said, almost too calmly, that he had already spoken to a tenant advocacy office and had documented everything, and that if I needed a witness to anything that had happened, he was available. I told him I hoped it wouldn't come to that, and that I was grateful. I knocked on my own front door. Dale opened it. He was wearing the particular expression he always wears when he's decided to be reasonable, chin forward, eyes patient, like he is already in the process of forgiving you for misunderstanding him. "Claire," he said, "come in. Let's talk about this like adults." I came in. My mother was sitting at my kitchen table. She looked older, or maybe she looked tired, or maybe she looked like a woman who had done something she knew was wrong and had spent a week trying to locate a version of the story where it wasn't. Ethan was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, not quite meeting my eyes. There was a coffee mug in front of my mother. No one had offered to put the kettle on for me. It didn't matter. I set my bag down. I stood in the middle of my own kitchen. I looked at the three of them and I let the silence go on for a moment longer than was comfortable. Dale spoke first. He always does. "We were in a crisis situation," he said, in the measured tone of a man presenting a reasonable argument to an unreasonable audience. Ethan's situation was serious. These were not safe people. We needed to act quickly, and we used the options available to us. "I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset," I said. He blinked. He had prepared for upset. "I'm here to tell you what happens next," I said, not to argue about what happened. My mother opened her mouth. I held up one hand, gently, and she closed it again. "The power of attorney you used is limited to personal banking and property management correspondence. It does not extend to trust assets. Every lawyer who has looked at this document in the past week has confirmed that. The sale was unauthorized. You know that now." I looked at Dale. "What you may not know yet is that signing a vendor authorization form without legal authority to do so, and submitting that authorization to a listing agent and to a buyer's representative, is fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada, Section 380. The word landed in the kitchen the way I intended it to. Ethan uncrossed his arms. He looked at Dale. Dale's chin came down a fraction. "Nobody is going to prison," Dale said, with slightly less certainty than before. "That's not my decision," I said. "The buyer's lawyer has already flagged the title irregularity in their documentation. Patricia Osei, the paralegal who caught this, has submitted a formal complaint to the Real Estate Council of Ontario regarding the listing agent's failure to verify signing authority. My lawyer has filed the relevant documentation with the land registry. Whether the Crown takes further interest in any of this is not something I control." My mother made a sound that was not quite a word. "There's also a civil matter," I said. "Marcus, my tenant, was told to vacate the property without my authorization, causing him documented financial losses. He has already consulted with a tenant advocate. I'll be covering any costs he incurred. Those will be recovered." "Claire." My mother's voice was a thread. "We were scared. Ethan could have been hurt." "I know you were scared," I said, and I meant it. "I understand exactly how this happened. Ethan was in trouble. Dale had a solution. It felt like an emergency, and emergencies make people do things they wouldn't otherwise do." I looked at my brother. He was staring at the floor. "But my fear doesn't stop mattering because yours started. I was 8,000 kilometers away keeping people alive, and the 3 people I trusted with my home tried to sell it without telling me." Ethan finally looked up. He looked like he was going to say something. He decided against it. "What I need from you today," I said, "is straightforward. Dale, I need you to sign a written acknowledgement, prepared by my lawyer, confirming that you initiated the listing process without authority and that you instruct the listing agent to destroy all documentation bearing my mother's signature in this transaction. My mother, I need you to revoke the power of attorney in writing. I have the revocation form here." I took a folded document from my bag. "I need it signed today, notarized by tomorrow." "Ethan, I can't solve your debt. I am not going to solve your debt. But I can refer you to a non-profit credit counseling service in Toronto that has helped people in situations worse than yours. That offer is on the table until the end of this week." Dale's jaw moved. "And if we don't cooperate?" I looked at him for a moment. Then I submit a formal police report and let the process go where it goes. The documentation already exists. My lawyer has everything. This is not a bluff, Dale. I've never bluffed in my life. A very long silence. My mother picked up the pen I had placed on the table. Her hand was shaking a little. She signed the revocation form. She didn't look at Dale while she did it. Dale stood there for another 30 seconds, long enough to preserve some sense that he had chosen this outcome rather than been backed into it. Then he sat down across from my mother and reached for the acknowledgement form. Ethan didn't say a word. He left through the back door a few minutes later. I heard his car start in the alley. When Dale and my mother left, I locked the door behind them. I stood in the front hallway of my house, my quiet, unremarkable, completely mine house, and I listened to the sound of nothing in particular. A car passing outside, the furnace clicking on, the ordinary sounds of a place that belonged to me. I texted Reshma. They signed. She replied, "Good. Get some sleep." I texted Marcus. "All clear for tomorrow. I'll have a check for you covering the full week plus 10% for the hassle. Thank you for everything." He replied, "Welcome home." I didn't turn every light on. I didn't make a speech. I just went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and made myself a cup of tea. I stood at the window and looked out at the bare lilac bushes in the November dark, and I thought about how they would bloom again in May. They always do. You don't have to do anything to make that happen. You just have to make sure you still own the yard. I went back to South Sudan 10 days later to finish my posting. Before I left, I sat across from a different notary, not the one my mother had originally used, and I made 3 changes to my estate documents. I removed my mother's power of attorney entirely. I named Reshma as my emergency legal contact, and I added a clause to the trust deed that required any proposed transaction involving the property to be confirmed by written authorization from me personally, transmitted through a verified secure channel, with a 72-hour waiting period before any document could be submitted to a third party. Dale called once more. 2 weeks after I was back in the field. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. He hasn't called since. Ethan contacted the credit counseling service. I know because the intake coordinator sent me a brief note to confirm the referral had been accepted, as I had requested. I don't know what happened after that. It isn't mine to know. My mother texted me on my birthday in January. She said she loved me and she was sorry. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond that day. A week later, I wrote back, "Thank you. I need more time." She replied, "I understand." That was the most honest conversation we had ever had. Out here, in the middle of work that is bigger than any family drama, I've had a lot of time to think about what I actually lost and what I kept. The house is still there. The trust is still intact. Marcus renewed his lease for another year. The lilacs will come back in May. What I almost lost was not the building. It was the proof that I had built something real, that the years of discipline and deferred comfort and careful planning had added up to something that belonged to me and couldn't be taken. They tried to tell me that my stability was a resource they were entitled to draw from. They were wrong. And I had put the paperwork in place to prove it. If you are working far from home, or if you have family members who see your success as a safety net they never asked your permission to use, please do one thing this week. Call a lawyer. Not because you don't trust your family, but because trust is not a legal instrument, and the people who love you the most are sometimes the least equipped to protect you from themselves. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches. Because if even one person hears this and makes that call before they need to, then every difficult minute of what I just told you was worth sharing.